Airport security stopped a black female doctor from boarding, then saw her name in the global medical system. "You can't be who you say you are." That's the first thing the security officer said to her. Not a greeting, not a question, a conclusion. Dr. Marcia Ellis stood at Gate 27A of JFK International Airport, her boarding pass in one hand, her passport in the other. She was 56 years old, tall, elegant in a reserved sort of way. Her skin glowed the rich hue of dark mahogany, and her eyes, though tired from years of work in underfunded hospitals and refugee clinics, still held a fire that refused to dim. But none of that mattered right now. The TSA officer, a man in his early 30s, buzz cut, with an impatience that suggested power used too often, waved her aside with a tight jaw. He didn't even look at her face when she handed him her credentials. "Step over here, ma'am. We need to verify something." Marcia knew what something meant. She'd heard it in every country, in every tone, through every version of routine inspection. But this time it burned differently. She was returning from a United Nations medical conference in Geneva where she had been the keynote speaker. Her speech on the ethics of medicine during conflict zones had ended with a standing ovation and a signed recognition by the World Health Coalition. And here she was, on American soil, being told again that she didn't belong. She gave the officer a patient smile. "Is there a problem with my passport?" He didn't answer. Instead, he scanned it, then frowned. A second officer joined him, then a third. Whispers. A phone call. Passengers flowed past her, murmuring, throwing glances, some curious, some apologetic, a few laced with open suspicion. A white couple clutching their toddler made a wide arc around her, as though her mere presence was contaminating the air. "Is there a reason I'm being delayed?" she asked again, this time firmer. "We just need to do an identity check. Could be a system glitch." The third officer shrugged. "Standard procedure." "Standard for whom?" she said quietly. None of them answered. 10 hours earlier, Geneva. The applause still echoed in her ears as she zipped her suitcase. The name Dr. Marcia Ellis, MD, MPH, FACS, was still printed across the conference backdrop when she left. She had posed for photos with health ministers, shaken hands with WHO directors. She had been invited to speak at Oxford next spring. But she didn't think about any of that. Instead, she thought of her mother's voice. "Don't matter how many degrees you got, baby. To them, you still just a black woman in the wrong place." She hated how right her mother had been. She'd fought so hard to be the exception. First in her class at Stanford Med, the youngest trauma surgeon at New York General, founder of the Global Mobile Health Initiative. She had every letter, every credential. Still, the world never let her forget the body she wore. Marcia glanced at her phone. A text from her daughter. "Mom, safe travels. Let me know when you land. Don't let anyone give you hell this time." She smiled sadly. Even her daughter knew. "Now JFK, Gate 27A. You're not in the system under that name," the first officer said. "That's why we're flagging it." "Not in what system?" she asked. He showed her a screen, a blurry copy of her passport photo, but her name read Marcia Ellis. A typo. One letter off. A system mismatch. An excuse. "That's not how it's spelled," she said, pointing. "Ma'am, we don't enter the names, we just verify. Your ID doesn't match." Marcia sighed. "Let me speak to your supervisor." "We're already calling him." The tone had shifted. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a problem. Flashback. Marcia, age 12. Chicago, 1980. Her first science fair. Her volcano model erupted perfectly. The white judges smiled politely, nodded at her notes, then gave the blue ribbon to a boy whose project had literally caught fire. Her father had crouched beside her afterward and said, "You gotta be twice as good to get half as far, sweetheart." She had been working on twice as good ever since. Back at JFK, the supervisor arrived. Tall, white, polished, clipboard in hand. Marcia introduced herself, extending both her passport and a second document, a printout from the World Health Coalition's database, listing her as Director of Crisis Surgery for Global Missions. He squinted, This says Ellis. The system says Marcia. That's a clerical error. You can clearly see the photo matches. You have my passport, my boarding pass. And yet, the system flags mismatches for a reason, he said. People have faked credentials before. I just gave a speech in Geneva. I'm on the official itinerary. Google me. I'm sure many people give speeches. I'm not many people, she said sharply, then regretted the heat in her voice. But it was too late. Now it wasn't just suspicion. It was ego. He wouldn't back down. A fourth officer arrived, this time a woman. She stood slightly behind the others, reading from a tablet. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Marcia tried to catch her gaze. Please, just check the WHO database. Or the UN logs. The woman hesitated. Then, silently, she began typing. Minutes ticked. Her flight began boarding. She was still standing to the side like a criminal. Another flashback. A hospital board meeting, 1999. She was the only black physician in the room. When she presented a proposal for trauma reform, the chairman asked if she had run those numbers by someone more experienced. She had herself. Back in the present, the female officer cleared her throat. She's telling the truth, she said softly. The Global Registry lists her as Dr. Marcia Ellis. She was honored 3 days ago. Geneva Medical Summit. The silence was heavy. The supervisor stiffened. Still, protocol required verification. You understand. Marcia looked him dead in the eye. No, I don't. Because if my skin were lighter, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I assure you, race has nothing to do with. Then why does it happen every time I travel? He opened his mouth, then closed it. No words. She picked up her things slowly. Her flight was almost fully boarded. Her seat was probably already reassigned. The woman officer stepped forward. Let me escort you, ma'am. I'll explain to the gate staff. Marcia nodded, but she turned back one last time. You know, I didn't come back here to be treated like this. I came back because a hospital in Queens just lost 2 surgeons to burnout. I was flying home to cover their shifts. For free. On my day off. She let that hang in the air. No one moved. As she finally boarded, the passengers who had watched said nothing. No apologies. No support. Just silence. She walked down the jet bridge alone. Dignity intact, but heart aching. When she reached her seat, 14A, a flight attendant looked up. Her face lit with recognition. Wait, are you Dr. Ellis? Marcia paused. Yes. The attendant smiled. My brother's alive because of you. Port-au-Prince. Earthquake zone. You operated on him in a tent clinic. Marcia blinked. That was years ago. We never forgot. The woman touched her arm. Thank you. For everything. And just like that, the plane became a little less cold. The flight had taken off smoothly. The clouds rolled beneath the plane like folds of white linen, and Marcia sat quietly, her eyes unfocused on the in-flight screen in front of her. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had always carried herself like this, calm, composed, unshaken on the outside. But inside her chest, a storm raged. She could still feel the heat in her throat, the embarrassment clawing through her ribs. All those eyes, all those assumptions, all those silent approvals of the way she was treated. And yet, here she was, sitting in her assigned seat, exactly as her ticket said. It wasn't about the delay, or the near miss of a flight. It was the implication, the look in that supervisor's eyes, that sterile mix of suspicion and authority. The unspoken, you don't belong here. Not at this level. And more than anything, it was the familiarity of it. She closed her eyes. She could still hear her father's voice, the way he'd leaned on the kitchen counter after a long day driving the bus route through South Side Chicago, watching her bent over her chemistry homework. You're gonna be more than they ever dreamed you could be, but that won't mean they'll treat you like you are. How many times had she lived that truth? A soft voice broke her thoughts. Dr. Ellis? Marcia turned to see the flight attendant again, the same one who had recognized her earlier. Her expression was different now, more formal, yet somehow gentler. Yes. There's a message for you from the captain. He asked me to deliver it personally. Marcia blinked. The captain? Yes, ma'am. The attendant handed her a small folded note, scribbled in blocky handwriting. Dr. Ellis, I was in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. I never forgot what you did for our medics. I am honored to have you aboard. If you need anything at all, please let me know. Captain Monroe. For a moment, Marcia couldn't breathe. She remembered that mission, remembered stitching open wounds on church benches, flushing gangrene with bottled water, handing her only dose of morphine to a young soldier because he was sobbing in agony. She remembered the helicopters circling above, the smell of burning plastic, the walls of the refugee clinic shaking during aftershocks. And now this. She smiled faintly. Her eyes shimmered. Thank you, she whispered. The attendant touched her shoulder gently, nodded, and left. By the time they landed at LaGuardia, dusk had turned the city into a maze of lights. Marcia collected her bag and moved through the terminal without hurry. She knew what waited on the other side. Not applause or gratitude, but an overbooked a burnt-out trauma team, and a hallway full of people who had nowhere else to go for care. This wasn't homecoming. This was duty. Her phone buzzed. Avery, daughter. You landed okay? Anything I should cuss someone out for? Marcia smiled. Marcia, I'll give you a full report after I sleep. Avery, you always say that, then fall asleep with your phone in your hand. Marcia, and still wake up ready to fight. Love you. Avery, love you more. She exhaled deeply, then walked toward the waiting line for taxis. The hospital was exactly as she left it. Cracked linoleum tiles, fluorescent lights too bright in some halls and flickering in others, and the familiar smell of antiseptic mixed with too many bodies in too small a space. Dr. Ellis! Someone called from across the lobby. It was Devin, one of the nurses from Trauma 3. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. You're really back? He said, half disbelieving. Only for 3 days. Filling in for Dr. Shin. He shook his head. You didn't have to. We would have figured it out. Yes, you would have, but not without someone collapsing. Devin sighed. One of the residents passed out during triage yesterday. Another threw up during her shift. We had 8 gunshot victims in 6 hours, 2 of them teenagers. Marcia's face didn't flinch. Put me where you need me. You sure? Devin, I didn't just give a speech in Geneva to come home and sleep. Her first patient was a young black boy, 15, shot through the shoulder in a crossfire. His mother stood in the hallway screaming. A police officer was already asking questions at the bedside, clipboard in hand. Get him out, Marcia said. I'm conducting an investigation, the officer snapped. You can conduct it after he survives. Right now, he's bleeding out. I set out. The officer hesitated. Then, seeing the rage flicker behind Marcia's eyes, he backed off. The surgery lasted an hour and 24 minutes. She saved his life. 3 more trauma cases followed. A woman stabbed in the neck. A construction worker whose chest was crushed. An overdose with internal bleeding. Marcia worked through them all like she was slicing through darkness with a scalpel. By the time the clock struck 4 a.m., she was finally in the staff lounge, slouched on the cracked vinyl couch, half-eaten granola bar in her hand. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unfamiliar number. They told me what happened at JFK. I'm sorry. I was there. I didn't say anything. I should have. Thank you for being who you are. The world's better because you didn't walk away. No name. Just words. She read it twice. Then again. Maybe that was enough. 2 days later, she was invited back to the airport this time, not to fly. A journalist had picked up her name from a leaked TSA report. A brief op-ed had gone viral. World-renowned surgeon questioned at airport because she's black. Marcia hadn't spoken to the press. She didn't plan to. She didn't need the attention. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Outside Terminal 4, a small group of med students had gathered. They held signs. We are here because she paved the way. Trust black doctors. Excellence shouldn't need permission. A few reporters hovered. One tried to shove a microphone toward her. "Dr. Ellis, do you believe the officers acted out of racism?" Marcia paused, then spoke slowly. "I believe they acted on the same bias this country was built on. The same bias that makes it easier to doubt a black woman than believe her. That sees credentials and still questions legitimacy. I don't need to assign names to that. It's in the air we breathe." The reporter blinked. A woman in the crowd shouted, "We love you, Dr. Ellis." Marcia smiled. For once, she let the warmth rise up. She didn't fight it back. That evening, a colleague sent her a photo. It was of a screen in the TSA training center. Her name was now listed in their Notable Persons of Global Contribution database, a rarely used, internal designation meant to prevent exactly the kind of incident she had just endured. Irony. But she didn't laugh. 3 weeks later, she stood at her daughter's graduation. Avery, now 26, was receiving her PhD in public health. As she stepped across the stage, she looked into the crowd, found her mother's eyes, and held them. Afterward, she hugged Marcia fiercely. "You know," Avery whispered, "I almost gave up after freshman year. I didn't think I could survive being the only black girl in every class. Then I saw what you dealt with and kept going. And I thought, maybe I can do that too." Marcia swallowed hard. "You've already gone farther." Avery grinned. "Only because you pushed the gate open first." At home that night, alone, Marcia stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She traced the lines on her face, the soft creases under her eyes, the small scar just under her jaw from a fall when she was 10. She didn't look like the woman in the medical journals, or the one in the airport security report, or the one they printed on posters. She just looked like herself. And that after all the years, the degrees, the airports, the wounds, the indignities, the victories felt enough. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at Marcia's office. Not an email, not a typed memo, a physical letter, handwritten in a childlike scrawl on lined paper with uneven margins and occasional spelling errors. "Dear Dr. Ellis, my name is Jeremiah. I'm 10 years old. You don't know me, but you saved my cousin at the hospital after he got shot. Mama said you worked all night and didn't stop until he was safe. I want to be a doctor like you, but I'm scared people won't believe in me because I'm black. Mama says I'm smart, but sometimes my teacher talks like I won't make it. I saw your picture on the news and she said, 'That's what greatness looks like. Can you write back and tell me if it's really possible?'" Marcia sat at her desk, completely still. Her hands trembled as she set the letter down. The quiet in her office felt deeper than usual. No pager buzzed. No intercom called. Just silence and the weight of Jeremiah's hope. She turned her chair toward the window and watched the city. The traffic below moved like blood through arteries. Lives in motion, futures waiting, and she realized, every day her existence whispered to some child like Jeremiah, "Yes, it's possible." She wrote back that evening. 3 days later, another letter arrived. This one from a woman in Atlanta, then one from a nurse in Nairobi, then an email from a medical student in Detroit. All of them had read about what happened at the airport, but none of them wanted to talk about that. They wanted to talk about surviving. They wanted to talk about not quitting. They wanted to thank her not for being perfect, but for being visible. It was as if her experience, painful and humiliating as it had been, had unlocked something bigger, a permission to speak, a thread of connection among people who knew what it meant to walk into a room where no one expected you to belong and stay anyway. That weekend, Marcia attended a medical conference in Boston. Not as a keynote, just as a guest. She was tired of stages, tired of lights. After one of the panels, a young South Asian woman approached her. "Dr. Ellis, I'm Surido, you have a second?" Marcia smiled. "Always. I just wanted to say, I've been following your work for years, and I watched that video from the airport." I cried. "Not because it surprised me, but because I felt seen." Marcia reached out and took her hand. "Then we'll keep showing up. That's all we can do." They stood in silence a moment longer. Then the young woman said, "You made me believe I could get through residency, even when no one there looked like me. You will get through it, Marcia said. And then you'll change it. In the months that followed, the story faded from headlines. The news moved on. Other scandals, other injustices, other names. But something had shifted. An email from the National Medical Equity Board arrived in her inbox. They wanted to name a new mentorship grant after her. She declined the name, but offered to lead the program. A former TSA agent reached out anonymous and said, I resigned. I couldn't unsee what happened to you. I'm applying to social work school. Her daughter started a community research lab focused on racial bias in emergency medical response. She named the first project the Ellis Initiative. And Marcia? She kept working. Day shifts, night shifts, international calls, conference panels, graduation ceremonies, funeral eulogies. She didn't slow down. But privately, she began something else. In a small room in the back of her house, she started recording herself. Short videos, stories, lessons. Not about medicine exactly, but about resilience. About how to walk through fire and not let it burn away your soul. She called the series Code Black, Healing While Black. The videos spread like wildfire. Not because they were flashy, but because they were real. One clip showed her sitting on her porch in sweats, saying, They saw my degrees and still asked me what I was doing in first class. They heard my lectures and still asked me if I was really a doctor. They read my name on international rosters and still asked me to prove myself. And you know what? I'm tired. But I'm not done. So if you're tired, shouldn't you dare give up. The system won't hand you the key. You'll have to be the door. Hospitals began using the series in DEI training. One med school reached out and asked if she'd consider developing a course around it. She said no first, but Avery persuaded her. Think of how many Jeremiahs are out there, her daughter said. Give them more than letters. Give them armor. So she designed the course, co-taught it with Avery. First at Columbia, then at Morehouse, then at Harvard. By the end of the year, it had spread to 10 universities. Despite all the recognition, Marcia never forgot how it started. A man with a badge, a scanner, a look, and the way the world, for one humiliating moment, agreed with him. She didn't seek revenge, but she did make one visit, back to JFK, not to confront, but to teach. The TSA regional director, after a public apology, invited her to speak at a leadership seminar. Marcia hesitated, then said yes. The room was stiff, unsure. She walked to the front, wearing her white coat, and began. I don't want an apology from the man who stopped me. I want something harder. I want awareness. Because that moment wasn't about me. It was about every person you've doubted and never apologized to. Every child who watched their mother be treated like she was less. Every student who gave up after one humiliation too many. And every agent who watched it all and said nothing, not because they're cruel, but because they've been trained not to see. You are the front line, so start looking with better eyes. No one spoke. But after the seminar, one woman approached her quietly and said, My daughter's in med school. I'm going to be better because of you. Marcia nodded. That's how it begins. Then came the award, presented by a joint panel of the United Nations and the International Health Organization, for her medical contributions, for her mentorship programs, and for what the board called her unwavering grace in the face of institutional injustice. At the ceremony, Avery stood next to her, radiant in a silver jumpsuit and curls that fell like fire. As the host read Marcia's name, there was a standing ovation. But Marcia didn't smile for the cameras. She turned to her daughter, took her hand, and whispered, This one's for every time they called me Miss instead of Doctor. Avery squeezed her hand. And every time you answered anyway. That night, Marcia found herself alone again. Hotel balcony, city lights, award in hand. She ran her thumb across the engraved lettering. Then she set it down. Because the truth was, no medal could make what happened at that airport right. But it could remind the world of what she chose to do with it. 6 months later, she was walking through an airport in Johannesburg. Different country, different rules. Same system, really. She placed her passport on the scanner. The agent, a young black woman with braids and bright eyes, looked up, froze, then smiled wide. Dr. Ellis? Yes, Marcia replied. I studied you in med school. You're the reason I specialize in trauma care now. Marcia blinked. You're a doctor? No, the woman laughed. Not yet. I'm working part-time here while I finish my final year, but I'll be certified next fall. Marcia placed her hand over hers. Then let me be the first to say Dr. Masiko, I believe in you. The woman's eyes shimmered, and this time no one stopped her at the gate. The plane took off as the sun began to rise behind the horizon, casting a golden light across the clouds. Marcia leaned back in her seat, not in first class, not in coach, just in her seat, exactly where she belonged. She wasn't thinking about the turbulence of public perception anymore. She was thinking about peace. But peace, it turned out, was never quite still. A few weeks after returning to the States, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, but something instinct maybe nudged her to pick up. Hello. A pause. Then a deep, hesitant voice. Dr. Ellis? This is Anthony Rivers. Silence stretched. Marcia's mind flipped through names and faces. Then it hit her. The TSA agent. The one who had stopped her. The one who scanned her, interrogated her, humiliated her. He continued. I don't know what I expected calling you. Maybe I just needed to say it out loud. Marcia's heart was a quiet drumbeat. Say what? I was wrong. No justification. No excuses. Just that. I watched the footage again, over and over. Not just of you, of others. People I stopped. People I delayed. And I realized, I've been part of something I never truly saw. And I think it took seeing your name in lights for me to finally look at my own reflection. Marcia stayed quiet. Not out of anger, out of choice. I resigned, he added. I know, she said. I read the report. He exhaled. I'm studying sociology now, trying to understand what I missed, how bias operates. I want to do better. I need to. For my son. His voice broke slightly. My boy's 6. He saw the video. He cried. Asked me why that lady looked scared. Now her voice softened. And what did you say? I told him. I made a mistake. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it right. They sat with that truth. Then Marcia said, I don't forgive easily, but I do believe people can change. I'm counting on that, he replied. She hung up without goodbye. Not coldly, just finally. Because some doors don't need to slam to close. Months passed. Seasons turned. And one chilly autumn evening, Marcia stood backstage at a youth summit in Washington, D.C. It wasn't the kind of spotlight she normally accepted, but this time, she'd been asked to speak directly to black girls in high school considering careers in science and medicine. The host introduced her, and the applause echoed before she even stepped into view. She walked out slowly. No slides, no notes, just her. And as the audience quieted, she spoke. I want to tell you something no one told me when I was your age. There will be moments, many moments, when you will be asked to shrink so others can stay comfortable. You will be questioned, interrupted, laughed at. You will walk into rooms where your very presence is an act of rebellion. But I want you to remember this. You carry more than your skin, your name, or your degrees. You carry your grandmother's prayers, your father's lessons, your mother's defiance. You are not a guest in medicine. You are its future. And when the world tries to clip your wings, you show them how high you can fly. By the time she stepped off the stage, there were tears in dozens of eyes. Teachers, parents, teenagers who suddenly believed in something bigger than themselves. Later that evening, in a quiet corner of the venue, a security guard tapped her shoulder. There's someone who wants to meet you, he said. She turned, expecting a donor, maybe an organizer. But it was Jeremiah, taller now, thinner, older than his letter had made him sound. He wore a simple button-up shirt and a backpack that looked too heavy for his frame. He smiled nervously. Hi, I'm Jeremiah. You wrote me back 2 years ago. Her eyes widened. Jeremiah. He pulled out a faded letter her creased a dozen times over. I carry it with me, still, because it's the first time someone ever told me I could do something big. She put a hand on his shoulder. You are doing something big. I want to study at Johns Hopkins, he said. Pre-med. You'll need grit, she warned. I've got plenty, he said. Because I had you. She took his other hand, held it, looked him in the eye. Then let me say it again, yes, it's possible. Years passed. Marcia grew older. Not tired, exactly, just more rooted. She kept teaching, kept mentoring, kept speaking when it mattered. Her face appeared less in the news. That suited her fine. But her name kept traveling. In research papers, in activist circles, in school textbooks, in emergency room protocols revised after her lectures, in the code of AI programs designed to reduce racial bias in diagnostic tools thanks to Avery's lab. And one morning, long after the first viral video had faded into internet archives, Marcia sat in a rocking chair, watching the sunrise from her porch. Avery joined her, now a mother herself, with a newborn in her arms. Guess who I named her after? Avery said softly. Marcia didn't respond. Her breath caught in her chest. She'll grow up hearing about you, Avery continued. Not just the doctor, but the woman who didn't let the world define her. Marcia reached for the baby, held her against her chest. She won't have to fight the same way we did, Avery said. No, Marcia said. But she'll know how if she needs to. They sat there together, generations stitched together by love, defiance, and purpose. And for the first time in a long time, Marcia didn't feel like she had to prove anything. She had already changed the world. Quietly, radically, unapologetically. The end.